to extend my sincere condolences and sympathies to the family of the late President Kaunda and to the nation of Zambia over his passing, because no doubt he made a huge impact on that country right from the first day of the independence in 1964, and even to the last day when he lived with us.
How will you describe President Kaunda?
You know, I first met him, I think I was a boy, I must have been around 15 years old, when he paid his first state visit to Botswana. That would have been around 1968. And I will be quite honest with you, I was in awe of the man because he came across as being so approachable. There wasn't any suggestion of arrogance. He was extremely outgoing, a very warm personality, very humble person, and all in all, a very decent human being. And the fact is that as a leader, you would think there's always an element of someone being a bit arrogant, a bit pompous, or what have you. But he was really down to earth. And it's something that I can remember had a lasting impression on me and many other people that I had of him during his lifetime. You know, I cannot talk about his leadership style as it applies to how he led his country, because I wasn't in Zambia, I'm not a Zambian, but I can just talk about his leadership style when it came to how he engaged other heads of state and governments in the region at a time when they were struggling for the liberation against white minority rule. And the formation of the frontline states, in which, like you said, the late President Nyerere played an important part, my own father, Samora Machel. These were people who he was able to work very closely with and was very much one of the drivers in trying to seek the freedom of the people in the region. And similarly, that went even further than our borders of the region into then I think it was probably the Organization of African Unity.
South Africa benefited a lot in terms of what the members of the frontline state did in terms of assisting us to be liberated. And of course, those countries, including Botswana, had to pay a heavy price.
Yes, that's very true. I mean, as we are talking about Zambia in particular right now, I mean, President Kaunda sacrificed a lot by offering his country to leaders of these various liberation movements. And I think there were many cadres, including high-ranking officials of the ANC, who were accommodated in Zambia. And they also played a very significant role, similarly, in the liberation of Zimbabwe today, Rhodesia then. And yes, we too in Botswana, we also had to sacrifice because we had from Mozambique, we had Samora Machel here, we had from South Africa, from Namibia, either staying or passing through Botswana, and some of their cadres putting up here as well. But it was encouraging because you could see someone like President Kaunda, you know, playing the role, a leadership role in that regard, where countries in the region like ours, Zambia and Tanzania, Mozambique, availed their countries for the liberation struggle.
Do we still have that kind of commitment in terms of synergy and the relationship member countries of SADC working together? Do we still have that kind of commitment and selflessness that we saw with leaders such as President Kaunda, Nyerere, and your late father, Mr. President?
You know, you can't compare like with like. The situation there was different. But even having said that, there was a uniqueness with the leaders of that time and the challenges that they faced, which brought out a different kind of person, a leader at that time that we needed at that time to resolve the issues that we were facing then. When you think of maybe there could have been others around the same time who would have been leading their countries, whether they would have been able to achieve what was achieved by the founders of those countries at the time, I'm not so sure. But as I say, they're not facing that situation today. But I think we were very lucky at that time to have had that type of leadership with that particular kind of character that they had, and the commitment and devotion they were engaged in, and willing to put their own country's interests aside for the betterment of the people of the region and the continent.
Looking at the regional body then and now, are we improving in terms of implementing the principle and the aspirations of the founding fathers of the SADC region in terms of the development of the region?
SADC has had its good days and its not so good days. But what I think we should focus on is the commitment to SADC still there, and does it live up to the expectations of the founding leaders? And I would say very much so. During my time when I was in office, those presidents in the SADC body showed tremendous commitment to trying to ensure that SADC worked, and it worked for the people of the region. But you know, when I talk about a trick question, again, it comes back to the fact that we're in a different Southern Africa today than we were then. With all the challenges, like currently going through this corona, this pandemic has set many countries, if not all countries, back in terms of the economy, the welfare of the citizens of the region. And therefore, it's a different kind of situation we find ourselves in that we were in then. But I've no doubt that even the current crop of leaders are just as determined and committed to the regional body as the founders were when they set it up.
How can we celebrate the late former President Kaunda?
I think as the region, we should try to engage with the African Union, because we shouldn't just look at President Kaunda as a national of Zambia only. He was also a citizen of our region, a citizen of the continent, who played a very major role. And that we need to try to bring about recognition in one form or the other, that they would have to sit down and discuss in exactly what form it should be, whether it could be an award given to top achievers, young people, as I had once suggested, from the African continent, so that the youth and the young people also are reminded constantly of the contribution that he made to Africa. But one thing goes without saying, one way or the other, there certainly needs to be some recognition, and he needs to be honored for that.
And for the current leaders, what can they learn from President Kaunda? I know it's another tricky question, but I think as a person who led the region and the continent, there are lessons that we can learn.
You like these trick questions, because I'm not going to go down the road of trying to assess or, pass judgment on any leader at this time. But for me, the one thing that stood out about him, as I said earlier, was his approachability his humbleness. I had mentioned that there was no sign of arrogance at all in him. You know, some leaders, and don't ask me to mention who, when they come into office, when they take power, it then all becomes about them. It becomes self-interest and tends to put aside that they are there for only one reason, and that is for the welfare of the people that they are supposed to serve. They are the servants. The people are not their servants. They are the servants of the people. And that is sometimes when you'll find in one or two cases, they tend to forget that.
All right, that is Sophie Mokoena there speaking to Ian Khama. Let's